This is Make It Plain, M.I.P. with Matsimela Makuma, Mark Thompson. Get woke.
This is essentially another installment in our Law and Order Get Ready for Impeachment series. We're happy to be joined now by a very special guest. We met when we were at MSNBC recently. He is a former U.S. attorney, and we actually had a pretty decent chat about, how this thing may all end up being resolved or unresolved, or what might end up in Trump actually being removed from office. Going to get his thoughts. Former U.S. Attorney Glenn Kirschner is here with us now, folks. Glenn, good morning to you, buddy. How are you?
Good morning, Mark. Happy to be with you, especially this morning.
Quite a day on yesterday. Were you surprised that Cohen went on ahead and did what he did?
I'm surprised at the timing of it. And we as former federal prosecutors sort of look at this and we try to apply the normal rules of our practice. I was a federal prosecutor for 30 years, and you can't really apply the normal rules of practice to this unusual circumstance. So I was surprised with the timing of it. I wasn't surprised with the substance of it.
Okay. Not surprised with the substance at all. Very interesting. Is it true? I just want to be sure I understand this fully and correctly. Cohen, that is, it's not explicit in the written plea agreement that he will be cooperating with authorities. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not a traditional cooperation agreement. It's actually a non-cooperation agreement. But what we haven't heard people talking about is something called superseding plea agreements. And all that means is, in my view, this is step one for Michael Cohen. This is an incremental step. This is the first plea agreement he's entered, and I have some theories about why it was entered at this time. But I think moving forward, we're going to see a superseding cooperation agreement, which will roll in anything that Bob Muller has been investigating, because, he has sent a portion of the Michael Cohen investigation to the Southern District of New York, and that resulted in yesterday's plea. But I've maintained all along that Bob Muller has retained a big hunk of the Michael Cohen investigation for himself, and I think that is still underway.
It wouldn't be that unusual for this to come, for that type of spelling out of a cooperation deal to come later. That wouldn't be out of the question.
It wouldn't be unprecedented. A little bit unusual. These are unusual times. But so what happens is often we will enter into a plea agreement with somebody sort of either not knowing the full universe of his criminal conduct, still investigating the universe of his criminal conduct. So we'll take this first step. We'll let him plead to a number of crimes that we've already wrapped up the investigation into, and then we'll continue to investigate, and then we'll just enter into a second or superseding, more inclusive plea agreement that is often a cooperation agreement. So, no, this is not unprecedented.
Now, what makes Glenn for an unindicted co-conspirator? Does that have to be declared by the court, by the prosecutor, spelled out? Or just for me looking at this now, Trump is named the president, not necessarily by personal name, but by title. Doesn't that automatically make Donald Trump an unindicted co-conspirator?
So a couple of ways to look at it. There's form and there's substance. In substance, because Michael Cohen in counts 7 and 8 said basically, I did this dirt with the president, the dirt being, paying hush money to porn stars to keep a lid on the information so that Trump had a better chance of being elected. I did this dirt with the president. In substance, that makes the president an unindicted co-conspirator. Now, it's a little bit of a misnomer because Michael Cohen isn't an indicted co-conspirator. He pled guilty, but he was never indicted. He pled guilty before the Southern District ever indicted him. And I don't mean to get down into the legal technical weeds, but, Michael Cohen, by announcing that he's guilty in counts 7 and 8 in his case, that in substance says, and by the way, the president is my unindicted co-conspirator. But more technically, usually what happens is we hand down indictments, so the grand jury hands down an indictment with a number of conspirators charged, and in that indictment, we will actually put, and so is an unindicted co-conspirator. It just means he was part of the conspiracy, but for whatever reason, we've decided not to bring charges against him.
Okay. So that's something else too that could come later, correct?
It could. I think the big ticket question, and it's more relevant than ever this morning after yesterday's developments, is what does Bob Mueller do moving forward? Because, he's got several choices, including what I have been calling the narrow pathway to indicting a sitting president. I always cringe and everybody has their own opinions based on their experience and their reading of the law. I firmly believe that there is a narrow pathway to indicting a sitting president, and the reason I'm comfortable saying it is because Neil Katyal, who is actually the former acting Solicitor General in the Obama administration, is the one who drafted, in large part, the Office of Legal Counsel, the OLC memo out of the Department of Justice saying, as a policy matter, we, the Department of Justice, don't indict sitting presidents. But Neil Katyal himself said, look, I drafted that, and there is an exception to policy that a special counsel can apply for to secure permission to indict a sitting president. And you know what? If the drafter of the OLC memo says it, it's good enough for me.
Yeah. Now let's move on to Manafort. That's pretty devastating news, I would think, to Trump. But now Manafort not being found guilty on every count, is that a setback at all?
No, not in the least. Actually, I don't want to, no spin going on here, but there are 10 charges on which the jury hung. Okay, they couldn't agree unanimously on guilt or innocence. They convicted him of 8 charges, and he's facing a lot of years behind those 8 convictions. But they hung on 10 charges. So what does that mean? That means the prosecutors actually can try him again on those 10 charges. So right now, Manafort is facing 2 more trials, not just 1. I don't believe the prosecutors will do that because I think they get plenty of bang for their buck out of the 8 convictions that they secured yesterday.
Right.
But, hung juries are not unusual. And in white-collar cases, because we often bring a number of different charges based on the technicalities of the bank fraud or the tax evasion that a defendant commits, it's not unusual to see a jury split the baby like this, return some guilty verdicts, but not be able to sort of convict of every count.
Was this complicated, do you think, for the jury? Is that one of the reasons they may have had some challenges? Was it difficult? You think this was a pretty detailed financial case? Do you think that may have been one of the reasons it was a challenge to get this done?
I think anytime you have document-intensive cases, and there are, the evidence was strong, both on the documentary evidence and on the witness testimony, but there are also a lot of hyper technical things that we have to prove in white collar cases.
Mm-hmm.
And, it is often the case that the jury, can't quite see its way through all of the technical ins and outs of all charges. Tax evasion, that's easy. We got to pay our taxes. He didn't pay his taxes while he was raking in money from foreign governments and hiding it in overseas accounts. We can all get that. But then some of the more nuanced charges, it doesn't surprise me that the jury struggled with some of that. And I have to say, I am loath to ever speak ill of a judge because I've been in front of hundreds and hundreds of them, and most of them are good, fair, decent, honorable folk. But, Judge Ellis really did put his thumb on the scales too many times, in my opinion, in ways that were really damaging. So I also think that could have factored into the jurors deciding that, what, we're going to hit him on some counts, we're not going to hit him on all counts.
Yeah, he was a little harsh, wasn't he? And a little bit, well, little is probably an understatement. He was really kind of out of control, honestly.
He kind of, at times it looked like he was beating the prosecutors like a rented mule. You know?
Yeah. Glenn Kirschner with us, folks, quarter past hour, former U.S. attorney. And how much of a factor do you think that played in the jury's deliberations, Glenn?
So it's important to remember that jurors are given instructions by the judge, and part of the judge's instructions include, and this is in every case, Mark, not just the Manafort case. Those instructions include, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you think anything I've said or done during the course of this trial indicates to you that I have an opinion on the facts one way or another, or opinion on the defendant's guilt one way or another, you must disregard that.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's kind of a prophylactic instruction because, a raise of an eyebrow at a particular time by a judge can signal something to a jury. So they are admonished in the strongest terms. You've got to ignore all of that because that's not evidence in this case. And I think that the jurors typically take those instructions to heart and they follow them. And so I'd like to think that they put aside whatever questionable behavior they saw from the judge, and they didn't let that weigh into their deliberations.
And the judge did give that instruction, we know?
He did.
Okay. So what is the relationship, Glenn, and we appreciate Glenn joining us, folks. He's actually on his way to do television at MSNBC. What is there any intersection? Because this was really a windfall in terms of guilt yesterday. 8 counts of guilty for Manafort, 8 counts of guilty for Michael Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any intersection between these two that we know
of? Not yet.
Okay.
But I think the intersection might be coming because I think one of the next big steps for Bob Mueller will be deciding what to do with the information that he's learned that supports collusion/conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And I think, based on the reporting, both Manafort and Michael Cohen are potential players, if only because we know that they both have information to offer about the Trump Tower meeting with Russians that was then, covered up when the president issued a false narrative claiming that meeting was about something other than what it was. So I think that intersection is coming, and I think those two defendants will collide at some point.
866-99-SIRIUS, 866-997-4748. Before, as you were coming on, I teased the audience that you and I had a conversation about how this could all end up. You and I both discussed the possibility that Trump may end up resigning. I think that's more and more likely than ever. Is that still a likely scenario based upon the one we discussed? Do you still feel that way, or just how do you see this wrapping up? What do you think is going to be the end result of Trump?
Yeah,
here?
there are so many pathways to this thing wrapping up, and none of us know. But my opinion has been from day one that I don't think the president finishes out his first term, and I say that with no joy and no satisfaction because I think this episode has been a tragedy for the country. But I think our president has shown himself to be somebody who is motivated solely by self-interest. And if he comes to a point in his presidency where the walls are crumbling around him and his only option is to save himself by resigning, that's what I suspect he'll do. But, I mean, there are so many pathways to get there because, we could talk all day, Mark, about whether Bob Mueller will simply drop a report to Congress, will indict all of the co-conspirators but leave the president out of it, will name the president as an unindicted co-conspirator, or the nuclear option, which may be supported by the evidence, indict the president along with everybody else. But I have a feeling rather than try to battle it out in both the House and the Senate in impeachment hearings, or, try to battle it out in court if that's where he ends up, I think he ends up issuing blanket pardons to friends, families, and political associates. He pardons himself, which is an open question under the law as to whether he can do it, but that won't stop him from doing it. He'll do it, and then he'll let the courts fight it out, and then he will resign, claiming that this whole thing has been going to give anybody the satisfaction of impeaching him or trying him.
Right.
That's my strong sense.
He'd rather go ahead and do it himself and play the victim rather than be taken out in that way.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's it. So one other question I have, and I want to get a quick call in. We do have a couple of calls. I want to ask you a legal question. Glenn Kirschner with us, folks, 20 minutes past the hour, former U.S. attorney. He'll be on MSNBC at the top of the hour. Be sure to check him out there. Glenn, I heard something the other day, and I just want to make sure I heard this right. When one is pardoned, okay, then that removes their ability to plead the fifth.
It does.
So could there be a scenario where Trump pardons all these people, but yet the special counsel can still call them as witnesses, and the House Judiciary Committee or an impeachment trial could call them as witnesses, and they would not be able to plead the fifth?
I would say in part that's true.
Okay.
So you can be pardoned for certain crimes, but you can still retain your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination for other crimes. For example, the president can only pardon somebody for a federal crime. He can't pardon somebody for a state crime. And I've been saying all along, if you've engaged in federal tax evasion, guess what? You've engaged in state tax evasion too. So a pardon may not extinguish all Fifth Amendment privileges that somebody has, but there's an easy enough way around that. All the prosecutors have to do after a president has pardoned somebody is say, you know what, over and above that, we're going to go belt and suspenders, and I'm going to give you immunity so that any lingering privilege you might have because you also did some state crimes, that's extinguished too. So there's more than one way to kind of extinguish somebody's Fifth Amendment privilege. A pardon is one way, but then we can go over and above and have some guarantees that they can't raise it by just granting them immunity on any lingering Fifth Amendment privilege they might have. So at the end of the day, Bob Mueller will be able to get the substantive testimony of anybody that the president has pardoned.
So, right. And so I guess I'm saying that to say, or asking that to ask, even if he pardons, that doesn't necessarily get him out of the woods in terms of facts and evidence still coming forward.
Exactly. The people he pardons can still be forced, compelled to provide information against him.
Yeah. 866-99-SIRIUS. We're here with Glenn Kirschner, former U.S. attorney. Louise.
And Mark, just let me say, it's assistant U.S. attorney. U.S. attorney is the top dog.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I was one of the federal prosecutors in that office. I don't want people to say I'm trying to blow up my own title.
Oh well, yeah, I definitely understand. I apologize. AUSA.
No worries.
AUSA is the proper terminology. Louise is in Pennsylvania. Louise, you got a question for Glenn Kirschner. God bless you. Good morning. Get woke and vote. Get ready for impeachment, Louise. Go right ahead.
And thank you so much for taking my call. And my question is, because the judge didn't appear, he might have made some judgments so that he didn't appear to lean toward the prosecution because maybe they'd say there's a mistrial. I don't know. What would that have to do with the mistrial? Like he said, well, that Manafort's spending that money had nothing to do with, the way he got the money. I forget what all went on because do other things. But anyway, will there be less likely to have a mistrial because it doesn't look like the judge was just ruling for the prosecution? That's my question.
Yeah. Hey, Louise. Thanks for the question. I think here's what happens when a judge says things that makes it seem like he's siding with one party or another. Mm-hmm. If it looks like he's siding with the prosecution, then the defense can say, you know what, Judge, we're not getting a fair trial. We move for a mistrial, and we want a do-over, perhaps with a new judge, because you've shown yourself to be biased in favor of the prosecution. That didn't happen in this case because here the judge was really beating up on the prosecution only, and he didn't beat up on the defense at all. So I don't think the defense had any argument that they were entitled to a mistrial because, the prosecution was on the receiving end of all the judge's criticism.
Yeah. That'll be tough. Thank you, Louise, for your call. Appreciate that. Lastly, Glenn, you mentioned that there is a narrow pathway to an indictment.
There is.
Do you think Muller, though, will choose that pathway?
Impossible to predict, Mark. Bob Muller was my chief of homicide at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. In large part, I learned how to prosecute murder cases by working with and for Bob Muller. He is something of a law enforcement superhero in my view. He's not political. He's not ideological. He's governed only by the rule of law and the evidence. So it's impossible to predict what he'll do. Now, based on everything I've seen reported in the public record, which is probably maybe 2% of what Bob Mueller has developed during his investigation, I have a serious question about what this president has done with the Russians to undermine our free and fair elections. And what I can say is if Bob Mueller has found evidence, and we'll have to wait and see, that supports that this president colluded with Russia to impact the presidential election, then I think Bob will do everything in his power to lawfully bring charges against the president to hold him accountable for that. So we have to see what he has. But if he has what he may have on Russian collusion and conspiracy and obstruction, I think there is a significant possibility that he'll seek permission from the Deputy Attorney General to indict a sitting president.
The other scenario I discussed with you when we were together, Glenn, is that if, in fact, and I think I asked you this, they don't choose that pathway, one can have an indictment or charges waiting for them once they leave office.
Exactly.
Right. And so, I'm still thinking that still might be an incentive for resignation. I mean, this stuff is pretty bad. You or I would be charged. Okay, just regular
we'd
folk.
already be wearing jumpsuits.
That's right. So, I mean, I don't see how anybody can say, well, okay, he did it. We can't charge a sitting president, and we can't even charge him when he leaves office. I just don't see how that passes muster or oppose integrity of even the Department of Justice.
Well, I'll tell you, here's one thing I'm even more confident of.
Okay.
I think if Bob Mueller has the evidence to indict, he may decide not to use that nuclear option and indict a sitting president, but I will bet you $1 that he will indict him, let that indictment remain under seal until the day the president leaves office, and then unseal it, and the president is now a defendant in a criminal case. That I'm even more sure he's going to do if he finds the evidence to support it.
And then you and I also discussed the last scenario where let's say he's going to charge Donald Trump Jr. Or any other close member of the family. And then that's a negotiation point. Well, if you don't step down, we'll indict your son and you when you leave office. I think all of those are plausible scenarios, even to a resignation.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. There's a legal question about the propriety of bargaining a resignation, a presidential resignation, as part of sort of the resolution of a criminal case against family members. Now, I'll tell you, we do it all the time when it comes to, let's say, a defendant whose family has criminal culpability. It's not unusual for us to bargain, the fact that we won't bring charges against your family as long as you take responsibility for your own crimes and plead guilty. But then when you add a presidential resignation into the mix, it's so unprecedented that I don't think any of us can predict where the sort of legalities or the ethics of that are. But I think in real terms, if the president sees that his family members are at risk of being indicted, he may go ahead and make that decision on his own, that I'm going to issue them pardons and then I'm going to resign and I'm going to get out of town.
Yeah. Glenn Kirschner with us, folks, former AUSA, former assistant U.S. attorney. We'll correct that. Glenn, it's a pleasure to meet you when we met, and glad we've seen each other a couple times since, and I told you I'd have you on the show. I'm glad you could join us. Thank you for your expertise, and we'd like to keep you close at hand in the days and weeks to come, because I know we're going to have to rely on your expertise even more as these cases develop, okay?
Yeah, the pleasure is mutual, Mark, and I appreciate the work you're doing to kind of spread the truth and to keep shining a light on the corruption that is going on day in and day out in our government.
Thank you, man. And folks, Glenn's going to be on, you'll be on MSNBC at the top of the hour, right?
I'll be on. A shout out to Stephanie Rule at 9 o'clock, one of my favorites. And
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
No, she's great. One of mine as well. So we'll check you out on the television, all righty?
Appreciate it, Mark.
All right. 9 a.m. Eastern, as a matter of fact. That's right. Thank you, Glenn, and enjoy your day, okay?
You too.
All right. Take care now.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. 866-99-SIRIUS, 866-997-4748. So what you have heard is from a former AUSA on, what this all means and what is what could be happening with this. We'll continue to look at it very, very closely. Hiring is challenging, but there's one place you can go where hiring is simple, fast, and smart, a place where growing businesses connect to qualified candidates. That place is ZipRecruiter.com/MIP. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards, but they don't stop there. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invite them to apply for your job. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and spotlights the top candidates, so you never miss a great match. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. With results like that, it's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is the highest rated hiring site in America. And right now, listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/MIP. That's ZipRecruiter.com/MIP. ZipRecruiter.com/MIP. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. What's going on with the South is Rising voter registration tour and mobilization. And it's an interesting name for it, the South is Rising. We're going to hear about that when we return. Latasha Brown and Cliff Albright of Black Voters Matter are going to join us next. Don't go away. Sirius XM Progress 127, Resistance Radio. Get woke and vote. Get ready for impeachment. This is MIP.
Get ready for impeachment.